Hello and welcome to the Road Monkey podcast and episode number 18. Last week's feedback has been incredible, with comments from all over the world following our discussion with Jennifer Say, the producer behind Netflix's Athlete A. Thank you to everyone who's been in touch, and please keep that feedback coming in. This week we are joined by TV presenter and journalist Mr. Jake Humphrey. Our discussion today meanders across a range of areas, from Jake's journey himself through the world of television and some of the lessons learned, through to his experiences interviewing some of the most successful individuals and teams in the world of sport and beyond. Jake co-hosts the most successful sports podcast in the country, and if you're not already subscribed, I cannot recommend it enough. And not just the show, but the community Jake and his co-host Damian are building and sharing high-performance discussions and ideas. Head over to the High Performance Podcast on the various platforms, as well as YouTube, and join the discussion on Instagram. So, on to today's discussion, as we dive into episode 18 of the Road Monkey podcast, a conversation with Jake Humphrey, lessons from the world of high performance. Hello and welcome to the show, Jake. How are we doing?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. How are you, Kevin?
Yeah, very well. Thanks for sharing some time with us today. We've got lots of curious questions to ask as we move through.
Great.
But just to get us started, obviously, I'm sure a lot of people are going to know who you are, and I've given everyone a bit of an insight on our introduction. But if you can just give us a bit of a headline as to what you do now, what your journey looked like over the last few years, kind of maybe some key points from it.
Yeah, I suppose the journey, first of all, is that I would describe myself as the most normal kid in the world. I went to school, a normal state school in Norwich, grew up in a little village just outside Norwich. At school, I was absolutely standard. Wasn't really in any of the sports teams to a great level, didn't do any of the acting, didn't do any of these sort of extra after school classes. I kind of floated through, got by doing the bare minimum amount of work, and then ended up doing my A-levels. And that's when things really changed dramatically, because I failed them. So I had to go back to school to redo my A-levels. But as luck would have it, I got an opportunity to get some work experience in TV after going back to redo my exams. So failing those exams was the single most fantastic thing that ever happened to me in all my life. That led to some work experience at a channel called Rapture Television. That led to kids TV, that led to Formula One, that led to BT Sport, that led to me sitting here talking to you now. But I certainly can pinpoint the day of the A-level failure as the day that this journey that I'm still on now, aged 42 nearly, began.
I know we'll talk about the podcast later, but you explore quite a lot around either athletes or just generally successful people who have had that kind of early, if you want to call it, trauma. And actually, it's fascinating from the start there that you can pick up that was a moment for you that was a negative experience, but actually it kind of spawned lots of positives going forwards.
Yeah, I think without really knowing it, I was being fitted with resilience at a relatively young age. Like a lot of young people, I suffered with bullying at one of my high schools, so I moved to another one. At the time, all you see is the bullying and the shitty feelings that come with it. I don't think that you really attribute any building of resilience to that period. But if you think about it, I was badly bullied. So every day I'd go to school, I remember being in the car with my mum, feeling sick. I used to remember that feeling of seeing her car drive off around the corner, and I used to see the car walk and think, oh my God, here we go. And then backpack on my back and through the school gates. We're talking about the age of like year 7, year 8 at high school. So 12, 13, 14, something like that. And then I didn't really realise that not everyone feels like that. So I remember saying to my wife, God, remember that feeling like when your parent drops you off at school and they drive off, how like sick you feel to the bottom of your stomach? And she was like, no, I didn't have that feeling once the whole time I was at school. But what that is building then is resilience. That's teaching me that things can be a bit crap, but you've got to crack on with it. And then exactly the same when I failed my A-levels, I wouldn't have said at the time it was creating any resilience. But actually, if you think about it, I had to go back to school and redo all those exams. And that's embarrassing because kids who are a year younger than you are almost like on a different planet at that time. You don't speak to the kids in the year below, do you? You're just with your mates, and they, you look at them as little kids, and suddenly I'm sitting in the back of the classroom when they returned to school after the summer break, and they must have been thinking, oh no, why is that guy from the upper sixth now doing it again? Like, that's embarrassing, right? And at the time, the only emotion is embarrassment. But years later, you realise that actually to get back into school, to get back on the horse, to go back in the classroom, to have them whispering and saying, oh, look at that guy, is creating resilience. And so I think that is a crucial part of my story. And that's why I love tapping into those conversations with the guests that we have on the High Performance podcast, because it is about resilience. And, you know, if you're Billy Munger and you've had a horrific accident where you've lost both of your legs, that's incomparable to what I went through. Or if you're Dame Kelly Holmes and you've been suffering serious mental health problems before you win 2 gold medals at the Olympics, or if you're Tom Daley and your dad's passed away through a brain tumour, that's genuine coming back from the darkest depths of despair for all of those guests. My story doesn't get anywhere close to that, but I still think that what I went through is a huge reason for achieving what I have done.
So when you took that step kind of back in and in that embarrassing situation, and you went back and you kind of ended up doing the work experience and stuff like that, was there a moment when you, I guess, latched on to the media route, the TV route, and actually went, this could actually be a bit of a direction for me, instead of kind of, like you say, that kind of just ambling through year after year with not much direction?
And you know what, Kevin, I've struggled a bit with this, because that definitely did happen. It has to have happened, because the Jake Humphrey who was doing his A-levels and working as a part-time waiter down the road from my mum and dad's house is not the same Jake Humphrey that was then striving constantly to be the very best on children's television, and then ending up in Formula One, having to fight and push and harry and be filled with self-belief. I mean, I remember going for a meeting with BBC Sport, and I was working on kids TV at the time, and I had this conversation, and at the end of it, the person that I met with made it absolutely crystal clear that BBC Sport don't employ A-level failing former kids TV presenters who've not got a single modicum of experience or a qualification in either sport or journalism. I'm just not that kind of person. Exactly. And just the exact words were, you will never work for BBC Sport. So I then picked up the phone to one of the other bosses and I said, look, I've been told I can't work for you, but I want to show you how willing I am to get an opportunity. So start me at the bottom. So after 8 years on kids telly, they used to give me an ISDN kit, and on the weekends I would go to 3rd and 4th division football matches and do 15-second reports for final score. And in my head, I'd moved on from that. I thought I was up here, and in reality I'm doing a job that I considered to be down there. But at some point I became the kind of person that was willing to do that. And also, I think one of the crucial things in life is to understand the route, like to work out, right, that person said no, but there is still a route here. What is that route? Because I think one of the big issues these days is that I don't think we're creating young people with any resilience. I think resilience is a lost art in some ways. And so I think people assume that when the journey gets difficult, when you're told you failed your A-levels, when you're told you're not going to be on BBC Sport, you automatically, or young people now automatically, I think, assume they must be on the wrong path. But that's totally incorrect. The path that is right for you is still the path that is going to throw obstacles in your way. It's still the path that is going to challenge you every minute of every day. It's still the path that is going to make you feel like you're totally going down the wrong avenue. But you've just got to keep going. And without that resilience and without that total understanding that it's okay and struggling and failing is all part of eventual success, I think it's really difficult.
I mean, being in kids TV, it's obviously perhaps a slightly different world to sport, although obviously there's still cameras, there's still a show to produce. So what did you feel from kind of those early years where effectively you did hone your craft, that you then kind of took forwards and you could actually show these bosses and people as you were working your way through the ranks that you did actually have a resume, even if it was something that actually you had to show them as opposed to with a piece of paper?
I think understanding that things take time is also a really, really important part of life. You know, the number of times I have conversations with people and they don't say, oh, I'd love to get an opportunity to work in television and see if one day I could end up doing what you're doing. They will literally message me and say, hi, I'm just doing my degree, but I really want to host a match of the day. Have you got some details of someone I can write to or something? And I will often go back to them and say, listen, you don't think that you're going to go from where you are now to sitting in Gary Lineker's chair or my chair or some other sports presenter's chair next year. This is a journey. And what I learned when I was at Rapture Television, which was where I started my career, and what I learned when I was on kids TV, meant that when I was standing in the pit lane in Australia in 2009 with the Chain theme tune ringing in my ears, and I was wearing full ear defenders because it's so loud, you have to be totally blocked out from everyone, and the TV compound where the producer and director and everyone else was sitting was about 1 kilometre away, and I'm purely connected by the mic pack on my back, and I've got Formula One cars driving past me at 80 kilometres an hour and a grandstand with 30,000 people in just a few yards away, and a really well-known racing driver and a really well-known team boss standing waiting for me to utter my first words as the Formula One presenter, and an audience on the BBC back home of a few million, because it's a big moment, the BBC getting Formula One back. The reason why in that moment I was able just to go, this is fine, this is all meant to be, this is all part of the journey, and you have got the equipment and you have got the weaponry that you need to deal with this. That was because of the hours and hours spent learning and honing without knowing that's what I was doing. But it's a bit like a pilot doing their hours behind the stick on the plane. You know, I needed those hours on children's BBC, and I needed those hours on cable television in Norwich, so that when that big moment came, it was kind of all right.
That's really interesting. Obviously yourself, you've developed. What did you, or can you pick up on any points or people specifically across maybe the more formative years of that journey that you kind of went, I picked up a lot from them, or maybe specific lessons that you learned to think that was a hallmark that actually I've kind of taken forwards and adopted to be my own?
Yeah, and there is one really big one, which is supporting people, giving them an opportunity and taking a risk. Because I think that so often people are risk averse when it comes to their big decisions, and they want someone else to take the leap first. And then if it works out, they'll copy them and they'll follow them. But when I was doing my A-levels, and a guy called Roger Farrant came to me and asked me if I would do a bit of hosting for Rapture Television, then eventually offered me a presenter's job while still doing my A-levels. That is him taking a risk on an A-level student. And then a guy called Paul Smith saw me on cable television in Norwich and decided that I could host the new children's BBC channel and be the very first presenter to appear on the new channel. He took an absolute risk there. And then Niall Sloan, who was the head of Formula One when I got the Formula One job, looked at a kids TV host and thought, right, I'll put him on Formula One. And that's a huge risk. And then when BT won the contract for the Premier League, and they're paying £500 million to launch the first sports network in the UK that we've seen in years, in the last 25 years, they came to me, big risk. They didn't go with someone who'd already been hosting football for the last decade. So my entire career has been built on people taking a chance, trusting me, and giving me an opportunity. And I suppose that would be a big lesson that I've taken, and that I would love other people to adopt, is don't always go down the safe route. Don't always do what everyone else has done, because if you just do what everyone else has done, your outcome will be exactly the same. You know, be brave enough to make a decision. Pin your hat on that person. Have the absolute courage of your convictions. And I think as long as in life your intentions are right, it's impossible to make a wrong decision, because as long as you're doing something because you think it's right for you or for your customers, or in the case of television, for the audience, or whether you think it's the right thing for that person, as long as you're doing it to benefit other people, then what can honestly go wrong? If it doesn't work out, but your intentions were good, well, that's fine, because that is what happens in life as well. But as long as you have the right intentions, you almost can't make a wrong decision. And I hope that bit of advice then frees people up to make braver decisions for the right reasons.
There was I think he was a coach of the All Blacks years ago who talked in a book, and he mentioned the phrase win or learn, and effectively saying, yes, sometimes it will go well, but a lot of the time it won't. But actually, there's always something you can take from it. And I think, like what you said there, and something that I've picked up as I've listened to the podcast, you don't hear too many negative-minded successful people. They might have had quite a lot of failures, maybe some of them very public, but the way they view it, the way they rephrase it, and the way they actually use that as fuel seems to be something that is quite a consistent thing among long-term successful people.
Yeah, and I think that the way that you even and a lot of people would describe them as they've had failures along the way. I don't think that they would even think that. I think that I think in their minds, they would say, yeah, I've had learnings along the way. And it's all about how we look at failure, I think. That's all it is. It is about our perception of what failure is. You know, if you watch a guy out on a football field, or like, I know you work a lot with swimmers, right? If you watch a swimmer just fucking up their starts again and again and again and again in training, you don't watch them and go, they failed there, they failed loads. You watch them and go, wow, look at that. They messed up and they kept going and they kept going and they kept going and they got it right. Or if you're a striker on a training pitch, no one says you're failing, because every day in training, at the end of it, you know, when you hear about the greats like Ronaldo, they stay behind and take 20 free kicks. Well, he's not scoring 20 free kicks after training. He's probably scoring 2 or 3. But it's the failure of the 17 or 18 of those 20 that is where that bit of learning is. So if we can reframe our thinking so that whenever we make mistakes, whenever things go wrong, whenever we fail, in inverted commas, we see it like you would see a swimmer on the blocks or a footballer in training or someone in the gym, when the personal trainer says, right, I want you to lift to failure, and you manage 8 reps. Well, next time you might manage 10, because lifting to failure is where the improvement is. That's where the growth is. And that is it's a really important mindset. And it's definitely something we explore a lot. You're right. On the podcast, we talk a lot about failure, and failing often, failing early, and failing forwards are the 3 ways to fail. But if you can get to a point where there's no such thing in your life as failure, only learnings, then it's quite powerful. And I think I've kind of got there. So I will still have really bad days where I will definitely make mistakes on the television, or I won't prepare properly, or sometimes even in my head, I know I'm about to say something and I think, hold on, you haven't researched that statistic. And I'll say it anyway. The next thing I know, my Twitter feed is alight with people saying, I can't believe Jake Humphrey thinks that. He clearly knows nothing about football, blah, blah, blah. And then I think, oh, you idiot. I knew that I shouldn't have gone there, and I bloody well did. I will scold myself and say, you've got to be better. But then that's the learning right there. And I say, right, great. So do you know what? The fact I've done that means that I won't do it again. And I think when you make a mistake once, it isn't a mistake. It's only a mistake if you do it again.
Well, obviously, you mentioned like, you know, Formula One and football, but actually, especially like with the Olympic stuff, Commonwealth Games, you've been across such a range of sports, and something that comes across when you're watching interviews of any athletes or teams or managers is that kind of void, I guess, between the excuse kind of complain aspects of it and then the kind of more resilient-y, positive forward thinking. And you mentioned, you know, obviously the podcast so far, the stuff with what happened with Robin van Persie and the way he was describing his attitude to parenting. And you were like, that mentality, if you were trying to sum up how successful people get there, whether it's fail once or fail 100 times, actually that kind of attitude of, I don't want to hear you whinging and complaining because that's not going to get you where you want to be. I just find that kind of thing really interesting to hear that from somebody from a parenting hat, not like a high performance hat.
Yeah, and I think that was the reason why that clip with Robin resonated so much. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of views over Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and that's one of the areas with our podcast that I'm most excited about, is that for some reason we've managed to get people to really open up in a way that I don't think they have previously, and to a point where they will bring their real lives into this. Because I think often when you're talking particularly to high performance athletes, it's all about the athlete side of things, and they very much separate me as an athlete and me as a human being. And I think when we start having those conversations on the podcast about the human element, then it makes it seem so real. And there are millions and millions, billions of parents around the world, and we can all relate to what Robin van Persie said about whether his son Shaquille was going to be a winner or a loser. And he said, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I will love you regardless. It's up to you to decide now whether you want to be a winner or a loser. And I grapple with that because we've already spoken about resilience. How do I build struggle and resilience for my children growing up in a beautiful house on the edge of a beautiful city with a dad who has been successful and can give them anything they want, and a mum who gave up her job in television to be with them all the time and is there for their every whim? How do I build resilience and struggle into their lives? Because it's such an important part of your toolkit that you need going forwards. And that is something that I don't have the answer to yet.
Do you find that something that obviously the podcast shares the story for like thousands and millions of people around the world, but actually there's some learning and development for both you and Damian along the way?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes, man. That's, I suppose, because I can't put myself in the minds of the listener, right? I just can't do that for obvious reasons. It's not possible. But I can just approach it from what am I interested in. And that's what I really love about the podcast. I really am so lucky to be the one that gets to sit there and ask the questions. And that's really what this is about. I'm actually wondering these things myself, and that's what's nice, I suppose. And that's why it feels really authentic. It's a bit like this, what you're doing, Kevin. You're doing this for a pod for other people to listen to, but really, let's be frank, this is you wanting answers to questions that intrigue you, right?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that, and looking at your journey and then the podcast starting kind of relatively late in your career, something I found with this is I always grappled in my jobs that I've done previously with that little thread that you want to pull on, but actually it's not part of your job, but you want to stay there and ask it. And then very occasionally you're at a conference and you get half an hour in a bar with somebody. And I remember sitting in a bar with a coach for an Olympic champion from London. I was actually in London to watch him win his gold medal. And I always thought, I wonder what it's like to coach that guy. And then I found myself 4 or 5 years later in a bar with his coach. And you spoke and it was such an amazing story. And you were just like, well, that's answered my question, but I'd love to have shared that with a lot of people. And the podcast suddenly became a way of not just doing that, but actually like, right, how far can we go with this? Because obviously then you start bouncing ideas off people and it gives you more threads to pull on. Do you think that's something that's probably going to drive like season 3, 4, 5, where you kind of maybe not anticipate things now, but you have a discussion with Ole or whoever it is and go, that's really interesting. Let's find somebody we can talk about that with.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that the podcast, let's be frank, the podcast originally was something that I wanted to do because I found it interesting. People often ask me what I love about my job. And the reality is, whether I'm hosting a World Cup or an Olympics, a Formula One race or a Premier League football match, I don't really care who wins. As long as Norwich aren't involved, which is my team, I'm very, very relaxed about who wins or loses that game. The thrill for me comes from watching high performance elite people delivering on a global stage, whether that's watching the footballers on the pitch, watching the managers on the touchline, or sitting in the studio with the pundits who've been there and done it and can talk to me about what it took physically and mentally to get themselves to a place where they were operating at their absolute limits. That is the thrill for me. And then I was the same as you. I wanted to share with people the things I was seeing and learning and hearing. And I sometimes feel sorry for football fans because they're all over social media sharing what they believe to be the right opinion about a certain club or a certain player or a certain situation. But they're only seeing it with 10% of the knowledge, because football clubs and footballers and professional sport doesn't share enough with the people. They don't take them on the journey enough. They kind of treat them as, well, you're the paying fans. You can come and cheer on a Saturday, but leave it to us to decide how we run this club and the decisions we make. But then they want those people when they need to sell tickets or they want to boast about how big their support is. Take them on the journey with you. Treat them with the real respect and the sort of adult approach that you should. And that's why I wanted to do the podcast, because I'd seen and heard all of this great stuff from these players and these managers and these leaders and these coaches. And I thought that needs to be shared. As the journey on the podcast is developing, very, very quickly, season 2 is looking very different to season 1. The episodes are relatively similar, but we've now set up High Performance on Instagram so we can start to create a community there. We're taking the interviews we do and we're recording them and putting them on YouTube. And the one that we recorded with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer a couple of weeks ago has almost got 500,000 views on YouTube just in the couple of weeks since we did the record. And we're trying to create now a high performance community where people can come, ask questions, feel like they're part of it. And you're right, I don't know what the end result of this is going to be, but I think it's going to be an awful lot bigger than just me and Damian recording a podcast in a room in central London somewhere.
I guess there's 2 angles really I want to pick up on that. The first one, you talked about it being a journey and actually taking the fans with you, and something that if you take like Manchester United as an example, they have a global coverage, and you've already alluded to some of the stuff with like the Twitter, they might only see 10% of what is actually going on. Whereas actually for you guys to be able to ask the questions and then another one and then another one, and obviously with Damian's different angle that he comes at, because obviously you're very different backgrounds, you get so many more layers to that person. But because it's out there for everyone to see, you almost feel like people are actually engaging more with whatever team they support, or even if they don't support them, if they're interested in just generally in football, they can kind of go, I never realised that was how much work a football manager did, or I never knew that was how much work a netball coach had to do, or whatever it is. So you actually then feel like you're almost creating more buy-in for the fans of the sport.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan on pulling back the curtain for anything, really. I mean, I'm a massive documentary head. I could spend all my time just watching documentaries about people. My fascination in life is people. I just think you can't do my job or be in my world unless you have a real interest in people. But pulling back the curtain, I love. That's why we did the podcast. I did a show last year for PT called Mic'd Up, where I just spent a day with a football manager and very simply put a microphone on them and then stood 20 yards away with a pair of headphones on and listened to how their day unfolded, and at relevant times hopped in and asked them questions, purely just to pull back and have a peek round the curtain. And I don't understand why in sport we don't tell people more often what's going on, why we don't take them on the journey with us, because it creates buy-in, and then it creates patience, then it creates trust. And buy-in, trust and patience, the three things that are missing the most, I think, particularly in football. So tell people why you've signed a certain player. Tell people why that signing hasn't worked out. Tell people of the player that you want to sign and why. Tell people of the player that was this close to signing. Tell people of why you made a certain decision with your tactics, but it didn't happen. Tell people why you haven't, as an owner, invested in a football club. Tell them, explain. Because 99% of people are good. 99% of people who are good are making decisions for good reasons as well. So therefore it's okay to share it, because everyone will just go, yeah, do you know what? Fair play. You're doing your best. It might not have worked out. But instead of me going onto social media with some tirade of hatred against you because I don't think you care, I now realise you do care. And like everyone in life, you've made a mistake and you're learning from it. So let's just share more. Share.
Do you find like the human element of it is kind of really coming to life? Obviously, you're used to spending time around these people, but in terms of like Joe Public, seeing them from behind the scenes, it's almost going, and certainly when I've watched elite athletes meet, just normal public out there, and they've gone, oh my God, they've got arms and legs, and they speak normally, and they watch TV and they eat food, and you go, yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And actually it starts to break the mystique of not just the fact that they're human, but actually they make mistakes, and they're open and they admit it, and that then I guess then almost makes, especially for the kids that are out there watching all these things and aspiring to be like them, it then kind of gives them almost a reality check of actually, if I haven't got, that natural, amazing talent, this guy's saying he didn't have it, but actually he worked really hard, he was honest, he listened, etc., etc. And that it almost then opens the door for them in their head to say, I can do it.
It's been very interesting, a few areas surrounding that. I mean, first of all, no crowds at football matches. You've finally heard what's going on the football field. And guess what's going on the football field? Exactly what goes on when you go and play a five-a-side game with your mates on a Wednesday evening somewhere. The same shouts, the same groans, the same moans, the same bits of praise. There's no magic. There's no special code that footballers are talking about. So that's the first thing that's broken down some of that mystique. The second thing is the documenting of everything. So whether it's people using their phones and just popping everything up on social media, little videos, finally players are having a voice. I remember speaking to Jermaine Genius, and he felt that when he was a footballer, he was unfairly criticised in the press, so stopped talking to the media because he had no other way of controlling anything. Whereas now, you can pick up your phone, within 5 seconds, you've shared a video with your most intimate thoughts to an audience of millions. And you've not only got control, but you're doing it from the heart. It's a really personal experience for the audience as well as for you. And I think that helps. Documentaries like the brilliant Formula One Drive to Survive documentary, or going behind the scenes at Sunderland or at Manchester City or Tottenham, as we're about to see, it's exactly the same. It's lifting back the curtain, and we're realising that these are just normal people. And I think that can only be good for all forms of sport, because I think finally people will realise that you can put sports stars and you can put business leaders and you can put high achievers on a pedestal, but at the end of the day, they're exactly like you and I, and they will have the same struggles and the same doubts and the same problems that you and I have.
Oh, that's brilliant. I think, well, I'm going to have to put you on the spot because you do it with all your guests.
Quite
so
right.
I've got a few questions I'm going to ask, but I'm not going to ask them as quickly. And the first one, you've obviously seen so many different, and I don't just mean in a sports sense from a winning and losing point of view, but actually across your career. What have been the things from a behaviours point of view, from kind of a trait, whether it's of a whole team like a culture, or whether it's an individual superstar you've come across? What are the things that, I mean, you've already mentioned buy-in, trust and patience, but actually were there certain things that you've just seen across your journey that you went, yeah, they had that, and that just seems to be something that pops up again and again?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things that we see all the time on the podcast, but there's something else I want to talk about first, which is how I think it has changed. The way to be successful has changed. And I don't think it matters whether you are a CEO of a FTSE 100. It doesn't matter whether you are a swimming coach, a gymnast coach, you're working in the music industry, or you're a football manager. The days of autocratic, aggressive, hairdryer-like, listen to me, this is the way we're going, you can like it or you can lump it, you can fit in or you can F off. I think those days are over. I think now it is about taking people on the journey with you. And I think more and more people who are not the leader are being empowered to go on the journey with that leader through better communication, through a much calmer, softer, more understanding approach to success in business and in life and in sport. And that is a fundamental change that I think we've noticed. I mean, I'm talking about purely from a football perspective. Jurgen Klopp, Maurizio Pochettino, Frank Lampard, Pep Guardiola, all of them and many more are making their players feel like they are part of that journey. They're all leaders together. They're dragging the team in the same direction together. So taking people with you is really, really important because it empowers them and they will give you and offer you more than you can ever imagine, rather than being told what to think, what to say and what to do. But in terms of traits that I've seen consistently, there are two things that I would point out. The first one is a relentlessness. All of the high achievers that we've met on the High Performance Podcast are relentless. And I'm not talking about being relentless for a day or for 2 days. I'm talking about the second trait, which is not only are you relentless, but you are absolutely, totally and utterly consistent. There's no point being relentless on a Monday, kind of relentless on a Tuesday, not that bothered on a Wednesday, a bit relentless on a Thursday, really relentless on a Friday. That's never going to happen. You've got to be consistent. And there's two things we've picked up time and time and time again: relentlessness and consistency. If you can get those two and you can marry them up, then you will be successful. That's not to say there aren't casualties along the way. That's not to say that a high performance mindset isn't actually really quite difficult at times, and quite challenging for people. And whether our high achievers are always happy, I would question. They're certainly almost to a person never contented. They might not even be happy, but they are consistently relentless.
That's fascinating. The quite a few podcasts I've listened to with various Olympic champions or Olympic coaches talk about the 45 minutes to a 1 hour mark, and say the second they've crossed the line, touched the wall, thrown the distance, whatever sport it is they're doing, and they've got the gold medal around their neck, they're kind of like, we won, it's amazing, it's been worth it. And then an hour passes and they're like, right, what next? And you're like, especially when it's what people that have been on a journey with someone for like more than a decade, you know, possibly a large chunk of their life, and have had probably some things fall by the wayside because of, like you said, that relentlessness, and whether it's entirely healthy for their wider life. That's out to the jury. But actually, what kind of mindset do you have to actually go, right, I've got to the top of the world, and now I've got to do it again and again and do it better and do it faster. And it's exhausting to kind of, I don't know about you, but when you spend time around these people, you're like, how do you sustain that again and again and again?
I think for me, it is empowering and it's exciting and it challenges me as well. You know, I kind of, maybe it's not a good thing, but I spend my days with these people, then leave thinking, right, Jake, come on, you've got to do more. And I think that's probably a good thing. I do think surrounding yourselves with people who are in a place where you would like to be is no bad thing. It's also quite a brave thing, because I've met a lot of people who go, I can't hang out with them because I'm just so jealous of what they've achieved, or, you know, I sort of look at them and wish I was them. So be with them, man. Be inspired and be empowered, and make it your mission to go and achieve what they've achieved. I think that's a really crucial lesson right there.
That's a great bit of advice. I'm going to ask for another piece of advice now. What would you give to yourself looking back? I mean, probably maybe spend more time studying your A-levels or not. But if you could go back to kind of your teenage years and you're back down in Norwich and you're looking, I guess, when your careers advisor says, what are you going to do for the next 30, 40 years of your life? And then what would you say to yourself?
It's a really good question, because I feel like I don't want to change too much. There's nothing where I think I wish I'd said this, because then I would have done that. I've got myself into a headspace now where someone said to me the other day, what is your definition of happiness? And my reply to them was wanting what you have. I'm not the kind of person that, like, I've still got loads of ambitions and loads of dreams and loads of things I want to achieve. I mean, I really love the play Hamilton. I've been to see it a couple of times in the West End. And one of the things he says is there's a million things I haven't done. And I kind of feel like that. I feel like I've only just scratched the surface, and sometimes I'm slightly panicked because I'm 42 this year, and I think, hold on a minute, I need to get a little bit of a wriggle on if I'm going to do those things. But I think the big bit of advice that I would probably give to myself at that young age, and by the way, I don't think that Jake, aged 14 or 15, would have taken this on, because I was just simply a late developer. I was just immature. I'm still good friends with a mate from school. He's my best friend at the time, called Stephen. And when me and Stephen get together, honestly, we laugh, Kevin, about how did we not see what everyone else saw? We were like years behind in terms of our mental development. So I don't think I would have taken this on board, but really my message to myself back then, it was just one of trust the process. I think things take time. And I think when you're young, you're desperate for things to happen straight away. I definitely was like that. And I would probably want to give myself that piece of advice when I first got my job in television, when I first started at Rapture TV. I used to love The Big Breakfast. And at that time, I was 18, 19 years old. I was working part-time as a presenter, having failed my A-levels, but I wanted to be where Johnny Vaughan was, hosting The Big Breakfast, and I wanted to be there tomorrow. 20 years later, I'm still on the journey. And that's cool. So I think trusting the process and being patient and letting things come to you is absolutely crucial.
Pretty much what Ollie said, if I remember rightly. What would
you
say? And he said, do it all again.
Yeah.
Okay. Talking, I mean, obviously you've come across a lot of adversity yourself, and you talk about, from a parent angle, how you're trying to build in that development of resilience and creating, I guess, adversity, but in a constructive way with the kids. What would your advice be to people out there facing adversity? Because obviously there's lots of people, like you said, get in touch and say, oh, I want to be on Match of the Day next week, or I want to be hosting the Olympics next year. And it's like, well, actually, here's something, you've got some barriers in the way. Here's my one piece of advice for you.
My one bit of advice for people who are facing a period of strife, or a period of questioning, or are struggling with the process, or are no longer trusting where they're going, is you need to expect to struggle. As long as you start any journey and expect there's going to be struggle, I think that is a really valuable bit of armor that you can have, actually, because then when it comes along, it doesn't knock you so far off your stride that you think, I'm just going to pack that in. If you're like, I expect that during this journey of having created the High Performance Podcast and hoping that it, has a real impact in the world, I am expecting, and I know that there will be days where I either question whether I carry on doing it, or I question why it isn't having the impact that I want it to. And what's lovely about knowing that is when it comes along, it's not going to derail me. I'm going to be like, right, here's that moment I was expecting. Right. So I need to try and work out how to deal with this. It's exactly the same in parenting. I know that I'm going to have some serious conversations, and very difficult conversations at various times with my kids. Or that as I get older, I am going to have complications with my health, because as you get older, those sorts of things happen. And I think if you can expect that there's going to be challenges along the way, doesn't mean to say that when it finally happens, it all turns out brilliantly and it goes in your favor. But I think it probably gives you a better chance of dealing with those challenges if you're expecting them, not fearing them. That's very different. Expecting them, but also expecting that you'll overcome them.
Okay. So you obviously talk about looking forwards there, and potentially some of the things you might come up against from a challenge point of view. In terms of like aspirations or things in the pipeline, what is next other than, dealing with kids?
Yeah, well, that's a permanent challenge. I feel like I'm in quite an interesting place now, because let's be absolutely clear. When I left the BBC to go to BT Sport, like, that was a risk. I'm a big fan of taking risks, not sitting in the comfy chair and challenging myself. But I walked away from probably the oldest, most famous broadcaster on the planet. on my very first day at BT Sport, I walked into the office and there was 5 people sitting around a table. And that was BT Sport. That was it. I mean, the BBC must have 100,000 employees around the world and maybe 60 channels in all these different countries and things. I walked into a place where there was 5 or 6 people sitting around a table. And I genuinely thought, what on earth have I done? I can't believe I did that. But actually, it turned out to be the best thing I ever did, to take that risk, to walk away from somewhere that I thought was so great and to go and do something totally different. And it's something that I love. Life is about taking risks. I don't know what your sort of approach to risk taking is, but I think if you can get yourself into that space, then that's a great thing. So I've kind of tried to take that with me on the journey, that taking risks is okay. But I think you really have to understand where you're at a certain time. And because I'd walked away from the BBC and gone to BT Sport, I could not afford for that to be a failure. I couldn't afford for BT Sport not to be a success for me. And I talk a fair bit on the podcast, we discuss it a lot about responsibility. And I believe fully in the mindset of 100% responsibility, because I think if you're handing responsibility for any facet of your life over to someone else and going down the blame route rather than the responsibility route, you're basically just giving away control. And as soon as you give away control, it's in someone else's hands. And as soon as it's in someone else's hands, well, how do you know they're going to care as much as you? So 100% responsibility. It was my responsibility to make BT Sport a success. And I've been there now for 7 years. And for the first sort of 6.5 of those years, it was all about that channel, that job, making it work. And I kind of feel I've reached a point now where I can experiment and push myself in other areas. So about a year ago, I set up a scholarship scheme at the UEA in Norwich, where I'm funding media students who wouldn't be able to afford to go to university to go through uni, because I think we need a more diverse mix in media. I think people from different backgrounds is absolutely crucial. And I wanted to help people and take a chance on them in the way that people took a chance on me all those years ago. And it was through my scholarship scheme that I met a young guy called George Bailey, who runs an eyewear brand called Coral Eyewear, which takes fishing nets and plastic in landfill and turns it into eyewear. So I've invested in that, and I'm working with him to try and make that a success, which is an exciting journey. I've got the podcast. 10 years ago, I set up a production company called Whisper with David Coulthard, who I was working with at the time on Formula One. We've now got about almost 100 staff. We're probably the fastest growing production company in the UK. So the combination of still doing the presenting, having a couple of kids, having the scholarship scheme, the charitable bits that I'm doing, the podcast, the eyewear, the production company, it's a lovely mix now. But I still keep on inviting more and more onto my plate. And I totally understand that I do it and I build this life for myself. But one day I'll be spread a bit thin perhaps, and I'll have to refocus. But at the moment, I'm just enjoying saying yes to lots of different opportunities.
Last question then. Are you happy?
100% happy. Not fulfilled and not content, but happy. In fact, I always have this thing where like Harry and I could watch a documentary about someone who's done something amazing, or we can watch a movie, or we can look at a social media account of these incredible people. And I cannot help myself but wonder why I am not there as well. Why have I not reached that level? And I think that's probably a healthy thing. But I am totally happy, totally happy.
Brilliant. Well, Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll make sure in the show notes we include all the links to everything so people can check out all these.
I appreciate it.
50 different things you're doing. But no, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure, Kevin. Thanks ever so much, mate, for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks again there, Jake. Some wonderful insights shared. I love this message of the new normal of leadership, and that dictatorial approaches are fast becoming outdated and a relic I'm sure many of us would be happy to see confined to the history books. Taking people on a journey with you is most certainly the future. Jake mentioned the trait of relentlessness, coupled with consistency, being a big part of those ingredients for success, which when you listen to his podcast really jump out at you. I would add that, of course, not everyone wants to be a high-performance manager or athlete, but that doesn't mean the takeaway points are any less applicable. Having patience, occasionally taking risks, being positive, having a growth mindset, and surrounding yourself with people like this will likely help you move forwards in both your careers and also in wider life. As promised, we would like to share with you the links to Jake's various endeavours, and I'm sure many of you are keen to find out more about these. His podcast is the High Performance Podcast, and Jake himself is on both Twitter and Instagram. The links for all of these are in the show notes. We've included a link to Coral Eyewear, so make sure you head over to their website to find out more about that. Such a cool project, recycling waste fishing nets and material from landfill, and there's a great video on their homepage that tells you more about the story behind that. That's it for us this week. Next week we're heading to the skies as we're speaking again to a pilot, and a very special one at that. Someone who's been on an incredible journey, flying in war zones, as well as being a display pilot and overcoming significant hurdles along the way. Tune in next week to find out more. Until then, thanks for listening. My name's Kevin Pickard, and you've been listening to the Road Monkey Podcast.